Grammar saves lives. Yes, it can start with a well-placed or necessary comma, such as, let's eat, Grandma, or let's eat, Grandma, as I believe many of us have seen in the Facebook meme. But it goes deeper than that to how we translate things and what words actually mean and when there's a good translation or where there's not. And I bring that up now at the very beginning because I have to make a grammatical point in the middle of this sermon. It's going to take me about a minute to get there. And I want to prepare you so that you push through it because I know how much everyone loves grammar as much as I do. And in this case, what am I talking about with grammar? Well, I'm talking about the word with, specifically a phrase like God is with you. Now, it's not really a phrase that's used in Judaism so much, at least not today. It's pretty common if you go to like a Protestant church or that sort of thing that you'll have the greeting, God be with you, and someone will respond also with you. It's worth thinking, first of all, what that means, but, is there an equivalent also in Judaism? I think about the closest we have is actually the oldest statement that we have in Judaism that we know of, which is the priestly blessing for the book of Numbers. Yevrech Adonai v'yishmerecha, may the Eternal bless you and keep you. May the countenance of the Eternal be made to shine upon you. May the countenance of the Eternal turn towards you, and may your paths be paths of peace. That's a long and drawn out way to say, may God be with you, which is typically Jewish, where we tend to do things as complicated as we possibly can. But we do have in the Tanakh a fair amount of examples that when translated into English, there's something like God was with someone. The word for with in Hebrew is im, and is also the word with in biblical Hebrew, so we can actually go back into the Tanakh and say, okay, im, there it is. And when we look for all the people that were im Adonai, or im the Eternal, or im another name of God, however it's being used in the Tanakh, it's very few people that actually get that designation. So Yaakov was im God, and Moshe Rabbeinu was im God, as was David and Solomon. That's a pretty small group, but it kind of makes sense with, the type of stories that they're involved with and the type of relationship that the narrative of the Tanakh has with them. But when we look at English translations, and I also checked it out, it's also in French and German translations. It's just the only other languages that I can actually have any level of authority in whatsoever. But there are a few other times that we get in, at least these languages, the translation of God being with someone, and im isn't used. And one of them is in Parashat Vayeshev, our Parsha for this week, where we read in the translation a few times that God was with Joseph. Now, there's a couple notable things about that. Number one is that this is a change of tone from the various relationships with our characters in the narrative and God up to this point, because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God speaks to them. It's not God was with them, even though we see that twice with Jacob, but we get Vaydaber Adonai El Avram, El Abraham, El Yitzchak. So God spoke to. And it's notable that when we get to the Joseph story, we get no speaking of God. There's silence. Instead, we get what I guess feels a little bit like a platitude. Well, God was with Joseph. Well, I sure hope so, because that's the second notable thing, is just how brutal this story is. The first time we get that translation of God being with Joseph was after he finally finds his way into Potiphar's household after what happened. Well, he was beaten and thrown into a pit and left for slavers to be sold to Egypt. Okay, God was with him. The next time is after a false accusation by Potiphar's wife, and now he's in prison with no prospect of coming out. And once again, God was with him. And whatever is going on in the Hebrew, other people notice this as well, because Potiphar also said that God was with Joseph. But what's actually being said here is not that God was with Joseph, because that's not what it says in Hebrew. The Hebrew says, Vehaya Adonai et Yosef. Deep breath, everyone. Okay, here it goes. Et means, well, it doesn't actually have a translatable meaning. It is a particle. It means that when et appears, what is about to follow is the direct object of a sentence. If you don't know what a direct object is, you really should just go and do a how-to direct object, because it's pretty necessary to know what a direct object is to learn just about any Indo-European or Semitic language, and I'm assuming also other languages. I just don't have any expertise in that whatsoever. So et means I say this, the direct object is coming. Et is important. In the Torah, the fourth and the sixth words in the entire Torah are et. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Bereshit, in a time of beginning, bara, past tense, created, Elohim, God, et, right? No translation, but created, and the next thing that follows is the object of the transitive verb created. Hashamayim, the heavens, ve'et, and, okay, what comes next? The pointer, haaretz, and the earth. In a time of beginning, the Eternal created et the heavens and et the earth. Well, there's enough baggage in that word that it's completely blown out of the water by the time we get to the mysticism in Judaism. And the Kabbalists point out that the very first act of creation was actually et. Stick with me, stick with me. Bereshit bara Elohim, in a time of beginning, God created what? Et. Before we get to the heavens, et comes first. What does that mean? What is et? Well, before I say what the direct object is, et contains with it infinite potential. What did God first create? If we don't know what comes next, anything could follow that point. So according to the Kabbalists, et was the first creation of God. It was the creative potential. And within Lurianic Kabbalah, we actually have this idea of Adam Kadmon, a kind of template of all creation, the most perfect version of everything that would come after that. Anyone studying in the Platonic world is not going to feel very unfamiliar with this if they were to step into the cave and then climb out into the light. Well, that light in the Platonic cave would also then be Adam Kadmon. It would be this template of all that would come to be before anything actually was created. That would be the et. And so what in the world is et doing in the Joseph story, and why are we saying that God was with Joseph when et does not mean with? Well, the first answer is, what else are we going to translate it as? This is one of those things that I think the answer starts getting so absolutely complicated that you just have to choose something. And I believe that our sages were highly aware of this complication. And you get a little bit of discussion among commentators on what this particularly means. And usually it's something like, well, this is a special kind of God being with Joseph because when he was in the prison, he was still able to use his mystical gifts of dream interpretation. So that's a very special kind of with that isn't necessarily what's being described with Moses and David and with Solomon. And I just don't accept that at all. First of all, this grammatically does not work. Okay? Vehaya Adonai et Yosef. Vehaya, that's to be, was, God was, and God was with. Vehaya Adonai. Back to grammar. To be is an intransitive verb. You cannot have a direct object after an intransitive verb. This grammatically makes no sense whatsoever unless we break down what's actually being said here, which is not that God was with Joseph. Now, you can go back to some of my videos on Beit Virtuali if you want a little bit more detail, but the name of God is a variation as well on to be. The name of God is not the name of John or Sarah. It is the name of something that is not nameable. It's the best we can do. It's all of existence, Zion, as we might say in German philosophy. But we have to say something. We have to put a shortcut there. We can't have a narrative if we're constantly trying to dance around this complication of God having no human attributes whatsoever. And so the best translation that maybe we can get is that Joseph is the direct object of the being of the eternal. All right, take another deep breath and let's actually try to get out of this. If Joseph is the realization of the potential of et, the beingness of God in this moment, then the story that Joseph is going through must have something to do with the archetypes of the eternal. In other words, what it means to exist, period. And what is the Joseph narrative? It's pretty brutal. I already went through it. The first God was with Joseph was after he was almost left for dead in a pit, sold to slavers. The second one was after a false accusation and then imprisonment. If we're ever feeling like we're having a really bad day, we might want to look at the Joseph story because whew. But as difficult as it is, I think that might be the point. And I think that today this point is incredibly important. Let me just pull one example of what I've been thinking of this week in relationship to this particular point in the Torah. One of the things that we know in psychology right now in the year 2021 and really for the last 5+ years is that depression among teenage girls especially it's an epidemic. Something is going radically wrong. And the psychologists who are looking at it, and when I was doing a lot of pastoral counseling with very, very depressed teens in the last few years, the answer to why they're depressed is almost always the same. And it has something to do with a TikTok feed or an Instagram feed. And this is not me jumping in once again and railing against social media, but it's against what's happening to our brains and our sense of existence when we live on that, especially 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, because we evolved in this situation where we would be looking and judging ourselves with family units, or when I grew up, at least with the people in my high school. I remember very vividly when I was at the University of Montana, Missoula, Montana, not the biggest town in the world, thinking that I was a pretty snazzy dresser or something like that. And one of my friends, one of the other music students, went to Seattle for a year and came back. And the first day I was like, what in the world are you wearing? Dude, this is what everyone's wearing in the world. Also wasn't true, but Seattle, a much bigger city than Missoula. And if we only see what's around us, we're judging ourselves by a limited set. And that's actually okay to some extent. As we are developing our mental health, am I healthy? Am I happy? Am I beautiful? Well, I'm not comparing myself to Kim Kardashian. Not that that should be done anyway. I'm comparing myself to my next door neighbor and my best friend. My next door neighbor and my best friend, because we live in the same small area, we have about the same problems. We have about the same potential. But when we're judging ourselves against everything, then what we believe is, I should be as beautiful as the most, well, how do you even say it that way? The most commercialized type of beauty that we think we see through the filters that are on Instagram. See, the point is, this is one of many ways. The other one is through consumer and media saying that a successful life is that we're happy all the time and we're never sad. And no wonder we are miserable, because we look at everyone else who appears to be happy. They're not, by the way. Why? How do I know that? Well, because the human condition is not about being happy all the time. It's punctuated moments of happiness and joy. This shouldn't be news to anyone. But when we compare ourselves every single day to what appears to be perfection and happiness, well, even if we're not 12 or 13 right now, we're still going to fall down. But when people have never been able to build their ego in a narrow enough group to be able to develop some level of healthy comparison, it's devastating. You see, what the Torah is saying is God is most manifest. Whatever it is, however it is that we understand the divine, that is most manifest when we are working through the pain, not when we are existing only as the pain. Go back to those Instagram and TikTok videos and you're going to see something called clout. And that clout is, let me list everything that's wrong with me. On the one hand, Baruch Hashem, that we have this ability to be open about our mental illnesses these days, our anxieties, our stresses, my ADHD, and all those other things that are affecting us and we used to not talk about before for shame. That's the good thing. The bad thing is when, well, I'm going to get more attention if I tell everyone that I'm this thing, so therefore I'm going to manifest my entire personality in not moving myself from this illness, this anxiety, because that's what's giving me the attention. The Joseph story, the manifestation of the potentiality of the divine, is saying, take the worst thing that you can imagine, and now work through it. Whatever it takes, that's the truth of the eternal. Oh yeah, and just to prove my point, there is one other character that God is et instead of God is im, and it's Yishmael. I don't think I'm making this up, that this is a critical point. The only two people in the Tanakh that God was et instead of im, that God was manifested in their story as the full potentiality of what that means, and that was after Ishmael and his mother Hagar were thrown out to die. Yet they were at the beginning of what would become a great people. And in that case, Vayaya Adonai et Ishmael. Another way to look at it is, when we are at our worst, that is when we have the most potential. How do I know that? Think of the thing that you know you need to change right now in your life. We all have something. Now, when's the last time you actually changed something? When you hit rock bottom. Me too. When Joseph hit rock bottom, God was et. God became the potential of what his life would be. So yeah, grammar saves, and here we are. Hanukkah is about to begin. It's the holiday of overcoming. It's not accidental that Joseph is the story we read during Hanukkah. This week, Vayeshev, Mikhail's coming up next week. And the reason we do that is to constantly remind us that the purpose of life is not to be happy. The purpose of life is to celebrate happiness when we have it, but learn as profoundly as we can when we are not, which is going to be a lot, no matter what is being sold to us and no matter what popular psychology book is telling us how we can be happy in 5 easy steps. If we believe that, then those maybe sparkling moments of instance, that moment where I hug my cat who's still alive and my wife gets off work and I get to see her. If I'm focused on why am I not happy, then I'm going to miss the beautiful happiness in that moment. That's the Joseph story. He had a few brilliant moments in Potiphar's household, then he lost it again, and then it started picking up. He worked through it. He realized his potential. He didn't give up. All those platitudes that I could throw out there, but it's deeper than that. It is the act of overcoming that most clearly manifests what the story of the divine is in our lives. And so I'm not going to wish God to be with you. But if you're going through pain right now, I know that God is at you. Because right now you're in the greatest manifestation of the potential that you possibly could ever imagine. And as hard as things are now, that could be a pretty powerful thing. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And because it's coming up quickly, Happy Hanukkah.
Beit Yisrael, Amecha ahavta, Ahavat olam. Beit Yisrael, Amecha ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot chokim mishpatim אותנו לימדת, תורה ומצוות חוקים